So thank you so much for your generous hosting and really getting this webinar organised. So to make best use of your time, welcome everybody. We're already up to 31 participants, and that may grow over the next few minutes. So really just first of all to say hello and thank you to all of you for coming along and making yourself available for this webinar. Bernie's already very graciously introduced myself and Mark. So really it says there, I'm an NLP master trainer, I'm an mBIT trainer and an mBIT master coach, as is Mark. I'm also a practicing mBIT coach. I still coach people and have done for a number of years now. I'm also separately psychotherapeutically trained. I've been a manager and a leader in commercial business in the past. Mark and I run a small business now, and we use mBraining every single day. We use it in our own lives and making the decisions, trying to make wiser decisions in our own lives and our own business, as well as using it with other people. So there are a few layers of how it can be used, and I'll seek to share that with you as we go through. But I'll go through the webinar, and Bernie is recording this, so it will be available to those who've been on the webinar afterwards. And I will go at pace, and please jot down your questions or pop them in the chat box as we go through. So welcome to this wild ride, as we say. So welcome to Using Your Multiple Brains with mBIT. So I wondered, why is mBIT essential? Why is it a relevant tool to have in your toolkit to go with all of the tools that you've already got? Some of you may be existing coaches. Some of you may be managers or leaders in business or work with those people, facilitating them or training them. Some of you may be body workers, masseurs, reflexologists, counselors, maybe clinicians, doctors, teachers, educators. So you've already got a load of existing skills in your toolkit. So why mBIT? Why is it relevant? Well, that got me thinking. I wonder, have you ever had a colleague or a client who expressed being torn between what they thought they ought to do, but perhaps there was something else they wanted to do? They were on the horns of a dilemma, if you like. What about people who appeared to form great action plans in coaching, but they just didn't follow them through? There was some way they were stucking themselves. Perhaps they identified loads of options. They were really good at coming up with all of those creative ideas. Oh, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. But they weren't that motivated by any of them. Perhaps you've encountered someone, this might apply to some of us occasionally, who were in the habit of burning the candle at both ends, and they were always on the go and busy. Or perhaps you've had some who just never really seemed to get off the blocks. Or perhaps somebody in your counseling or your coaching, or just a friend that you were talking to or a colleague, would spontaneously become emotional, but then batten down the hatches and almost suppress that emotion. Well, from an mBIT perspective, the chances are that we would identify that their multiple brains were out of balance. Now, the good thing is, in comes mBraining, because above all else, mBraining is about helping us and helping us to help other people when we're coaches to get their multiple brains back into balance. So there's a copy of the book for those of you who are already booked on to the coach certification or are going to. You get a copy of the book free when you come along to the program. And I love the title. I love the cover anyway, but mBraining, which stands for multiple braining. And you can see pictures there on the screen. You've got the head brain there. Obviously the heart is front and center, and you've got a gut brain down there, all interwoven with that complex neurology. And the subtitle always does it for me. Using your multiple brains to do cool stuff. That was something that Marvin and Grant, the authors and the co-creators of this field, felt really strongly about. That this isn't only about science, although it is about science. And it's not only about coaching, although it is about coaching. This is about doing cool stuff in our own lives and being able to facilitate other people more elegantly. So before we go any further, I wonder if, and this is a bit different to another webinar I've done because I can't see you on screen, so I'm going to have to trust you. Can I ask you, wherever you're sitting right now, just to, and I know it's an odd question, just point to your brain a moment for me, please. Yep, that's right. Okay. Now, if I were a betting woman, and I'm not, I would probably say at least 90% of you pointed obligingly to your head brain for me. Thank you very much indeed for humouring me. I appreciate it. Now, of course, if you ask most people in the street or in your workplace, they would do similarly, because we're used to thinking of our brain as equated with our head. And in actual fact, it's only one of our multiple brains. And there you go. You can see the three that on mBIT coach certification we talk about, which is the head brain. Yes, it is a really complex, important piece of kit. Our heart brain and our gut brain, and how the three of those interconnect and actually work best when they're all aligned and when they're working together. So there's more going on than we might perhaps have realized. Now, I guess an important thing to recognize and for me to say is that it's not just Marvin and Grant calling these brains. Actually, there's a lot of other authorities that have been using these sort of terms. So, for example, a chap that we talk about in the course, Michael Gershon, Professor Gershon wrote this book, The Second Brain, all about the gut. And when you think about it, we talk about, I've got a gut instinct, or no guts, no glory. We talk about this in our language all the time. So that's a really excellent book. And also this one I can highly recommend. And those of you who perhaps prefer videos instead of reading books, or perhaps you're time poor, if you go onto YouTube afterwards and Google Julia Enders, you can see the spelling on screen, and gut, you'll see, I think it's about a 17-minute video with her talking compellingly about the 10% of us that isn't human, our microbiome. In other words, the friendly bacteria that live inside us, keeping us safe and healthy. Tommy Spalding talks about a heart-led leader. Other people are talking about leading from the heart. One of my favorites, Bugs, Bowels and Behavior. Who knew that was going to be a bestseller with a title like that? So my point is, there are lots and lots of people who are well researched, who are very credible from all sorts of different contexts, all talking about head, heart and gut, all as brains. So actually, if you want to not get behind the curve, you want to go with the momentum and really make sure that you're now at the forefront of discovering more about our amazing multiple brains. So just a little bit of background. Where did mBraining come from? So this amazing toolkit came from neuroscience primarily. Grant often jokes, Grant Suzalu, one of the co-developers of the field, he's Australian, and he often jokes in our community about having jumped out of the womb already a scientist. He reads, sleeps, breathes, and eats scientific papers just for fun. He doesn't have a television, so that helps, and he's read over the years more than 6,000 neuroscientific studies and has cross-correlated those for our benefit. He often says he's read them so that we don't have to. So mBraining did come from all sorts of brands of neuroscience, particularly neurogastroenterology, which is the science of how our gut is a brain; neurocardiology, the science of how our heart is a brain; and plain old neuroscience, which is obviously how our head, brain, and central nervous system function. mBraining also was drawn from the neurolinguistics. Now, I know some of the people on the call may have a background in NLP, neurolinguistic programming. And as you know, Bernie runs and owns the NLP Training Institute in Ireland and has worked internationally. This is about how both our thinking informs our language, and also how what we say informs our neurology and therefore the way we're functioning internally. So those of you who've studied this sort of thing before in NLP, you may have noticed that when people said, "I see what you mean," we recognize that, oh, they're coming from a visual preference, perhaps. Well, similarly, in mBraining, when someone's saying they wear their heart on their sleeve, well, intuitively, we understand what they mean. What we may not have realized is their heart as a brain is actually functioning differently, and their neurology in their heart is firing up when they're talking like that. So again, that's one of the things we go into when we're on the program. Cognitive linguistics is about, again, how we function when we're thinking and talking to ourselves internally. So they've done lots of fMRI scanning of people's head brains that show which centers in the head brain are lighting up. And surprise, surprise, when someone is feeling emotions, the limbic structures in the head, which receive instructions from the heart, neurologically speaking, those are lighting up much more so. So again, there's more evidence that these three brains are actually connected and interconnected. They're not separate. Then also from behavioral modeling. Grant and Marvin are both behavioral modelers at heart. There you go. Even I'm noticing my language now as I go through. And they wanted to know, so who seems really aligned? Who's making wise decisions in this world? Who's really effective at what they're doing? And they noticed from modeling various people who were doing this, that they were in contact with and aligned between their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions, and also what they were doing. And therefore they came across as really congruent. And again, that's distilled into the model that we have within mBIT. And esoteric studies. We may have some of you on the call who have other brands of experience, whether it be meditation, Reiki, a faith-based belief, yoga. All sorts of these topics, actually, we call them ancient wisdoms in mBraining. This is actually now the time when neuroscience and those ancient wisdom practices are coming together. When all the things that we've known intuitively that have worked over the millennia, we've now got evidence for. And we have so many people coming along on the programs who say, finally, this is validating in the 21st century what I've known all along, which is quite liberating. So one of the things you may have noticed is I've been talking about mBraining and multiple brains, and this webinar is about mBraining and mBIT. You may have been curious, mBIT are the multiple brain integration techniques. So they're the really practical piece. I showed you lots of those books earlier on, and they are excellent books. I've read almost all of them. And one of the things they have in common is they share the philosophy of mBraining, but they're not so hot on the practical, so how do I do this? What am I going to do and how am I going to use it? And this is where mBraining is really strong, because Marvin and Grant worked up this model that they now call mBIT, multiple brain integration techniques, so that we can, as facilitators, as coaches, as leaders, educators, clinicians, we can practically help other people. But some of those people, when you mention mBraining or mBIT to them or multiple brains, may get a little bit freaked out by the use of the word brain. And I'll give you an example. I know that when I spoke to my sister, who's a bit older than me, she's now retired, but she was a general practitioner, a family doctor all of her life. Now, she was always the scientist of the family when we were growing up. So I was quite chuffed when I first did my mBIT coach certification, and I got a copy of the book for her, and I went to meet her for coffee, and I pressed it into her hand and I said, "You've got to read this. It's full of science. You'll love it." And to her credit, she went away and read it a couple of times, and we got back together about a month later for coffee. And I said excitedly, "What did you think? What did you think of the book?" And she said, "Do you know, it was really a great read. It's got a lovely, accessible tone of voice, and there's loads of case studies. It's very practical. I can see how you could use it with people." I got a bit hung up on the authors calling the heart and the gut a brain. And I said to her, "Of course, you could call them any number of other things." I said, "Actually, what they're talking about is a complex and adaptive functional and structural neural network." And she said, "Exactly. Well, why didn't they call it that?" So once she had another label for it, she was fine. She was well on board. So it's worthwhile thinking about, if someone you're talking to reacts a little bit when you use the word brain, then perhaps think how else you might be able to describe your heart as a heart intelligence, or your gut as a neural network, or a soul, a center. Some of you may use the language of a chakra. It doesn't really matter how you describe them. We use brain as a bit of a shorthand because that's how the neuroscientists are labeling them, and I'm not going to contradict a neuroscientist because I'm not one. But certainly it's worthwhile just pacing those out and thinking how other people would describe them. So you might want to know a little bit more about, okay, we've got these multiple brains. What are they actually for? What do they do differently? And how do we end up aligning them? Well, just the tip of the iceberg on this webinar. Each of the brains is actually designed to do a totally different thing. So, for example, our head brain is designed to do perceiving. So taking information in from the world around us, seeing things. You'll notice our eyes are in our head, our ears are in our head, our mouth and our nose are in our head. So we do a lot of perceiving through the incredibly complex neural network that is our head brain. We do a lot of thinking through our head brain. So our head brain is a fantastic complex processor that even AI hasn't been able to match yet. And making meaning. So sometimes we say, "Oh, my head's running away with a story about this." That's because we're making meaning. And if you were curious, our head brain contains about 86 billion neurons. To give you a bit of a sense of scale, they used to say we had 100 billion neurons. The average chimpanzee would be about 14 billion neurons. So you might say we're a chimpanzee short of 100 billion. Gives you a mental picture. So what about our heart? And I notice even saying that, my voice tone changed. And that was not deliberate and understandable. So our heart brain, and it's very intuitive, is about feeling emotions. How do we feel about something? It's about valuing. If you have a conversation, one of those meaningful conversations with somebody else about what's important to you in this context, do you notice how often their hand, with unconscious competence, goes straight to their chest? Their hand goes over their heart to really get in touch with what they're valuing, what's important to them. And it's also about connecting. So relationships, if I ask you just to get a picture now of someone who's really important to you, someone you care about and you truly care for, and notice where you're feeling that. If you just pop your hand on your chest now, over your heart, and notice how that feeling of that relationship with that person is amplified. So that's where we build our relationships, in our heart. To give you a sense of scale, because I've already mentioned the head brain is 86 billion neurons, give or take. The heart brain contains approximately 200 to 500,000 neurons. So it's a different scale from billions to thousands. However, don't let us imagine that that's not really powerful. And we talk much more in the program and demonstrate how what we say in mBIT is that the heart leads. And intuitively, we know that if someone's heart isn't in something, it's unlikely to happen. But if their heart and soul are fully in it, then watch out, world. So a sense of scale for what is 200 to 500,000 neurons. Sorry, I gave you the wrong figures. 30 to 120,000 neurons. That's approximately the same size as your average lobster or lizard head brain. So, and you'd be surprised how complex lobster social lives are, would you believe? And on to the gut brain. Lovely visual there of a gut brain. So the gut brain is approximately those other figures I mentioned, 200 to 500 million neurons. So we've gone from head brain, billions, heart brain, thousands, and now gut brain, millions. So who knew that there were 200 to 500 million neurons in our distributed gut? By the way, the gut brain is the one that is particularly referred to as a distributed brain. In other words, it goes all the way from the inside of our lips, including our tongue and all of our throat, and all the way through. I think you know what I mean without me having to go into details. So it's a distributed brain. So when you've heard people talking about, I can't swallow that, or, oh, I've got butterflies, or even some of the expletives you might have heard them using, that might be coming from the gut brain. And to give you a sense of size, a cat brain's head brain, a cat's head brain is approximately 500 million. So that gives you a sense of scale. And our gut brain, excuse me, is our seat of core identity. So you know when we're talking to someone asking about their deepest sense of self, do you notice they never say, well, I've never noticed yet, anybody say, who I am up high? They always say, who I am deep down. And that's because that's our core, our center of who we are. Self-preservation, so anything to do with safety or security. I know sometimes when I'm coaching someone, or perhaps when I'm doing psychotherapy, sometimes when we're having a conversation that is getting quite close to home, notice close to home is kind of like identity, isn't it? People might just reach out for a cushion and put that in front of their belly, or might put their hands across their tummy. So I'm noticing there that there's some self-preservation, some security going on. And also mobilization. So have you noticed when either you're coaching someone or you're having a conversation with someone who's really fired up about something, they might get a bit fidgety in their seat, or the legs might start going, or they get up out of the chair ready to take action. So mobilization and motivation are largely to do with the gut brain. So it's worthwhile thinking about, for what purpose might it be useful to know this stuff in your context? How could you be aware of how other people are processing at the moment? Is this person primarily in their head? Are they not listening to their heart? Are they doing both of the first two, but perhaps not using their gut for action? You can start becoming aware of how they're processing. You might then be able to facilitate them using mBIT, as we teach in the program, techniques so that you can help them become better aligned. Importantly, to access their own wisdom. As Mark will tell you, I don't really have that much wisdom for anybody other than myself. None of us do. So this is all about helping people access their own alignment and their own wisdom. So what might get in the way for people that we encounter? And of course, by the way, this might actually go for ourselves as well. So when one of the brains or intelligences is used to the exclusion of others, certainly in our society, in the West, we tend to use our head brains a lot. So if you look at our media, if you look at our societal structures, we tend to, if you like, put our head on a pedestal. We've really given thinking an importance that it is worthy of, but not at the exclusion of feeling, excuse me, emoting or taking action. They're both important too. Or it might be one of the others that's excluding. The second one is a bit similar. One intelligence swamps or overrides the others. This is where all three are present, but one of them almost says, yes, but what do you know? I'm going to take over. Or this is the one that's important to me. And each of us actually is likely to have one of our multiple brains that up until now we may have tended to hang out more with, be more familiar with, rely upon more. Maybe one intelligence is used inappropriately to do the job or prime function of the others. Have you ever heard of somebody saying, I'm going to eat to my heart's content? Now, the heart doesn't have a satiety reflex. It doesn't have the same way that our gut does of saying, oh, I'm full, I've had enough, I couldn't possibly have another mouthful. So if people eat to their heart's content, as in, for example, comfort eating, if they're upset or they're stressed, then actually that's the heart brain being used inappropriately to do what is, after all, one of the jobs of the gut brain, which is to take goodness in for us, nutrition. When one or more of the three intelligences are in conflict with one another, again, those of you who have done or read some NLP will know about parts. When people say, oh, on the one hand, my head wants to do this, I'm thinking this, but on the other hand, I really want to do that. That would be an example of conflict. When intelligences are working together, but perhaps they're used in the wrong sequence. In other words, the person's not getting the result that they want. So, having identified some of the ways that people might inadvertently, unconsciously get in the way for themselves, the next piece we're going to look at briefly is, okay, so what? How is this? How do we put this into practice? How do we help ourselves? How do we help other people? Well, what we start looking at and go into a lot of detail in the program is one of the underpinning principles, which is autonomic coherence, which means balance. It means coming from a place where all of our brains can align much more easily. So our autonomic nervous system is outside of our conscious control, but one of the ways we can influence it is by breathing. So one of the things we practice is a thing called balanced breathing. Now, before we begin, if you remember perhaps a couple of times when you were a little bit stressed, or think about how you were thinking at the time, or how you were feeling at the time, or how you were acting. Then think about a different time when you were really laid back, perhaps on a beach somewhere or something like that. You were probably thinking and feeling and acting very differently. So in mBIT and mBraining, we come from an underpinning principle that in order to access our innate wisdom that we've already got within our multiple brains, we need to come from balance. And that's best achieved by breathing in for the same amount of time as we breathe out, approximately 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out. And you can see on screen, I've shared there a sine wave. And you'll notice there's beautiful smooth transitions at both the top and the bottom of those curves. So for example, if you imagine breathing in, you're following the curve up to the top. And then when you reach the top, you smoothly transition to breathing out. And then smoothly transition again to breathing in, taking about 6 seconds in each direction. Now, in a moment, I'm just going to play a track that in mBIT we lovingly call the dings. You'll hear a bell and an ocean in the background just because it's soothing. And if you imagine that the dings, which are 6 seconds apart, by the way, occur at the top of the wave and at the bottom of the wave. If this is too long for you, please find your own even balanced breathing. maybe 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. For those of you that are already practiced in meditation and yoga and it's a bit too short for you, feel free to do the full 10 seconds in, 10 seconds out. With my current chest at the moment, I am in absolute awe of that. So just do what is comfortable for you. Noticing if you just put your hand on your tummy, when we breathe in, breathe all the way down into your belly. And when we breathe in, our belly should actually come out. And then when we breathe out, the belly just falls back down and our hands come in towards us. So we're not breathing in from the shoulders, we're breathing in from the belly and letting it fall out naturally. So I'd like you just to call to mind perhaps a context, a small outcome that you'd like to explore privately for yourself. Bring something to mind that you're curious about. And I'm just going to start in the background, the track. And just breathe in all the way to your belly and all the way out. Finding your own balanced rhythm. We're particularly going to be aiming for calm alert. So it's not quite like meditation, because we're not going for relaxed, and we're not going for stimulated. We're going for that calm, neutral. Continue that balanced breathing. Letting that flow evenly and easily. And you can continue breathing in a balanced way. So that was potentially one of your first experiences of balanced breathing. If you just check back in now in relation to that topic you chose, that outcome you were curious about, just check how you feel about that now and how it's important to you, what you truly want in relation to it. Notice what additional information is available to you. What ideas may have come in while you were breathing, and also how it relates to you and who you are. Maybe what you want to do about it, having done that breathing. And that's a routine we do a lot of times during mBIT coach certification. It's something that becomes increasingly easy and natural as a way of accessing our coherence and aligning our multiple brains. So you don't have to have done NLP at all to come to mBIT. And some people who have done NLP do join us in mBIT. And those of you who've come from NLP will be relieved to know that in mBIT, we only have one model. For me, that's one of the towering strengths of mBIT. And this is that model. I'm going to share it with you now. And what we do in the program is we work our way through this in bite-sized chunks so that you become really familiar with it, truly able to use it eloquently and elegantly, and feeling deeply comfortable with it. You'll notice that the arrow goes upwards. So we always start at the bottom, and that's what you've just been doing. Autonomic balance or coherence, accessed through that balanced breathing. So that's because if we're out of balance, then our head, our heart, and our gut will respond very differently than if they are in that balance. So that's why we always use that as our neutral starting point and throughout the process. Then we get the multiple brains to communicate whatever they notice in that particular situation or inquiry. Then we have a way during the program of getting them into congruence, and then we take them up to highest expressions. And you'll notice that the highest expressions for each of the brains, the head brain, its Sunday best term, if you like, is the cephalic brain, and the highest expression of the head is creativity. It's amazing at being creative, coming up with new solutions, options, insights. Our heart, or excuse me, our cardiac brain is best at being compassionate. But in order to be wise compassion, it also has to be self-compassion as well as compassion for others. And it has to involve creativity and courage. And our enteric, or our gut brain, the highest expression is courage. So you'll be familiar with gutsy courage. And again, for all of these three to show up, they have to be aligned and congruent. And from there, wisdom emerges. So that's a process that you would learn and become both competent and confident in by the end of the 4-day program. It's an absolute blessing, and one of the things I love is that after coach certification, so many people share either with myself and Mark privately, or particularly on our Facebook community, mBIT Coaches International, which is a private group that you get invited to if you wish to join, and people sharing their learnings. In theory, it's called a community, but my feeling is it's very much more of a family. I often call it the M family, because it's incredibly collaborative, very warm, and I'm blessed to say that some of the best friends I've ever had in my life I've developed since joining the mBraining community. So I hope to welcome a few of you into that in the near future. So what if you do learn mBIT? What if you do come on a program at a time that suits you? So one of the things I hope is that you would then remember to involve all of your brains, whether it's in coaching, in your medical practice if you're a clinician, in teaching if you're an educator, in your work with clients if you're a complementary practitioner of another kind, or a counsellor, or let's face it, in our own lives and in our own decisions, to make sure they're well thought through, that they match our own values and what's important to us and what we want, and also that there's congruent action that represents who we are. But this stuff isn't new. It's been around since before mBraining. We've got to make sure that we always have a heart, that we use our brain, our head brain, and also that we step into our own courage, just like the lion in The Wizard of Oz. So, as with all coaching, awareness is the gatekeeper of all wisdom. So that's why I hope that during this webinar I've shared with you a few snippets from the wisdom coming from Marvin and Grant, who co-created mBraining. Certainly, if you want to find out more, we're going to have room in a moment for plenty of questions. I can see the chat box has been going live with lovely questions. I know Bernie and Mark have been answering some of those, and we can perhaps have some questions in a moment where you raise your hand and we unmute you. If you want to find out more, you can also visit www.mbraining.com. That's Grant's website, and there are so many other resources on there, including, by the way, free copies of the Dings, So you heard the dings earlier on when we were balance breathing. If you want to download the MP3s, he's made them absolutely free for you. I think they're on the resources page, things that you can download there. So what do you gain by attending the program? I'm not going to read that out to you. You'll have it on the recording. You've got it in front of you, so I won't read it out. But certainly you'll gain all of those things and more beside. A great experience, and also hopefully lifelong friends, certainly if my experience is anything to go by. And a warm welcome, very warm welcome. In terms of where we go from here, as I said, we'll have questions in a moment. Thank you so much indeed. There's the date there of the mBIT certification in Ireland that Bernie is hosting, running from the 12th to the 15th of July. There are also programs running this year in South Africa, Canada, Israel, Greece, and UK. And there are many other mBIT trainers in a part of the world or a part of Europe that you are, that we're not. And certainly we're a really collaborative bunch, so we're always happy to recommend each other. So over to you, Bernie and Mark. Let the questions commence. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Reb. Just having a look, has anybody got any questions they'd like to raise their hand, and we can unmute you one by one? They've all gone coy on us. Oh, here we are.
Yep.
Aileen, here we go.
Aisling,
sorry. Hi, Aisling.
Just to confuse you, I'm just curious. I came across the work of Dr. Alan Watkins a number of years ago. He had quite an interesting TED talk about coherence.
Yeah.
Balanced breathing. Is that a separate field, or has this helped to inform this work?
Do you know, that's such a beautiful question. It is a separate field. However, he particularly referred to the work of heartmath.org, which is a global organization. Grant and Marvin, one of the reasons I think that our community is very generative and very collaborative is that that's the lead we've very much taken from Marvin and Grant. They made sure that when they started this field, they worked alongside all sorts of other people who were already playing in this field of multiple intelligences. And they work very closely with HeartMath. And certainly in the program, they give full credit to all of the different routes, if you like, that different organizations and fields that are coming to very similar conclusions. One of the differences with mBIT, it gives a very practical how and so what. So it almost picks up where that left off and takes it to a stage further. So definitely, it's a really good TED talk. Thanks for mentioning it, and people would probably enjoy going to look at that.
Thanks.
Who else has got a question? Just click and raise your hand or put something in the chat box. Oh, Paula. Paula Nixon.
Hi, Paula.
Have we unmuted Paula?
Yep. Oh. Paula, are you unmuted? Paula, it would appear I got a message to say that we can't unmute you because of the version that you're actually using. Could you type your question and then I'll read it out loud?
Great idea.
Yeah, thank you very much for sticking your hand up, Paula. In the meantime, whilst Paula's typing that, we've got somebody else. Eileen?
Eileen, yes.
Aileen.
Aileen.
Sorry,
Aileen.
Bernie.
Yes.
Might be just worth unmuting all the participants, I think.
Aileen, you have an older version as well, and Apologies. This is actually, I like this because at least now for future webinars, we know to say to people to download the latest version. I wasn't aware that that would that would.
That's a really good point. And by the way, Dara has just said, don't unmute all. I think she's in a busy area.
Okay.
Oh, Paula's questions come up.
Okay, so this sounds very interesting on a personal level. I'd also like to know which industries, sectors are showing an interest in investing in mBIT.
That's a fantastic question, Paula. Thank you so much. Speaking personally, we've had now 7 doctors come through our coach certification trainings. We've also had medical researchers and nurses. So the health industry, the health sector is incredibly interested in this. There's a lot of case studies going on right at this moment in the health sector. Also educationalists. We've had a couple of university lecturers and quite a few secondary teachers and primary teachers through the course. So the education sector is very interested as well. We've got a lot of people in the commercial sector. So we've had everything from company directors, finance directors, heads of human resources. We've had an ops director and a couple of business owners, and not business owners like me that have a very small business, myself and Mark, but large corporations. In fact, in Australia, mBIT was used as the basis for, I think it was over $1 billion Australian dollars safety program for the largest Southern Hemisphere rail network improvement plan or extension. And that was with people who haven't had any experience of coaching or particularly training or personal development, and some of them quite sort of burly construction workers, and it went down an absolute storm, and it's been a huge success.
That was in the engagement around health and safety on that major construction project. There's also quite a lot of interest around the insurance markets, around making decisions that are not just based on lots of statistics and financial information. So we've had a CEO for a major reinsurance company who's been already on the program with us and is currently looking after a company in Germany.
So great question, Paula. And one of the things that Grant often talks about is really we depend on the people who come along on the program to take it out and to use it, act on it, demonstrate it and share it in their sectors. So more and more sectors are absolutely welcome, and more countries as well.
Okay, is there anybody else out there who would like to ask a question?
Oh, okay. Lovely from Aileen.
Yep. Do you want me to read it out? So it says, hi folks, thanks for the webinar. I'm curious, the numbers of neurons for head, gut, and heart are hugely different. Just curious about the balance given to each part in decision making. I had thought that balance would be by equal attention to all three.
Oh, I love that question so much. One of the things I frustratingly say probably too often is it depends. So yes, the number of neurons doesn't indicate the amount of attention we pay to each of the neural networks or the brains. Excuse me. It just relates to the complexity of the neural network. What we do is we seek to, with every individual, identify how are they mBraining the process of how they're using their multiple brains in that given context in that moment. So I'll give you a personal example of 2 executives that I've coached in the past 2 months. One of them I would describe as was pretty locked in his head. And he was trying to do emotional intelligence from a common sense and information perspective. Now, I'm sure most of us can hear that the piece that was really missing was his heart in that particular example. So by helping him pay more attention to his heart, he was able to get more in touch with that and factor it in. And I had a different executive last week who's a very senior person in the higher education industry, and he was actually, excuse me, he was very in touch with his heart. He was doing some stucking around his self-identity and working from an older identity, and therefore didn't have that much confidence. And by working with his gut and getting that aligned with all the others, both of the other two, he was able to feel that he was able to think more easily, felt really good about it, and he was able to take the steps and be confident as he went forward. So that's just a practical couple of examples, but that's a beautiful question.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think just to add just something to that is that our multiple brains communicate in different ways. And we've already talked about the different functions that they have. And we may find that we are maybe listening to one more than another, or maybe not even aware of one at all. So the mBraining process, or the mBIT technique, is really about how we bring our multiple brains together, as you said, to work in balance so that we get our own emergent wisdom.
Yeah, lovely point there, Mark. The fact that actually we don't always communicate only through language. So we're all very familiar with body language, and I mentioned the example of the cushion or someone folding their arms or scratching their head. And of course there are other ways. Have you ever been in a situation when your tummy rumbled? Well, we know that that's possibly our tummy telling us that we're hungry. So that's an example of how our other brains might start communicating. And again, we go into a lot more detail of that on the program.
And we have 3 more hands. Paula, Ralph, should be unmuted now.
Hello, Paula.
Hi, Reeve. It's Paula. We're in sunny Lanzarote at the moment.
Yay.
I definitely used my brain on that one. I wanted a holiday. I needed a holiday, so we went on holiday. Now, my partner Alan has been listening into this, and his question is: Has the education department taken it on, especially to use mBraining within education?
Oh, that's fantastic. Please thank Alan for the question. And also thanks for listening in. I appreciate that.
He had no choice.
That was part of the bargain. Be by the pool, listen to the webinar. So it depends from country to country. Certainly in the Netherlands, obviously I know that you know Wilbert. Wilbert Molenaar, for everybody else, is one of our master trainers in mBIT. He's working with the Dutch government in terms of starting mBIT as a modality to be used right from primary school or even preschool onwards. A very dear colleague of ours in Denmark, Crystal Freiberg Land, who's another mBIT trainer there, she's actually written a couple of books, particularly for people who have children or work with children who are not neurotypical. So maybe on the autistic spectrum disorder. And one is called The Superhero Brain, and one is called The Superhero Heart. And they're very empowering books based on mBIT to help these children recognize how they're different and have special gifts that they can also contribute. So I know that they're also being used in some schools to help both the children themselves and also the other children become familiar with how they're different, and that's also from an mBIT perspective. And there are also some fantastic mBIT coaches, master coaches like yourself, Paula, mBIT trainers around the world who have a special interest in education, who are really taking it out there, taking it into schools. I know that an amazing mBIT trainer in Scotland, Lisa Kabaridis. I believe she did a talk to a lot of educators and made sure they all had a copy of the book. So it is getting there. We're still early days, but hopefully if all of the enthusiasm on this webinar is anything to go by, then people will get it out there eventually.
Okay, and Dara's also just said that she's also done work with teachers in schools, bringing mBIT into schools. So thanks very much for that, Dara.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dara.
And Paula Nixon has posted a question. Hang on. Wait till I find it again. I've lost it. Paula, sorry, just give me a moment.
Do you want me to read it?
Okay.
Yes, if you take it, because...
Paula says, do you have a simple explanation of what the neurons are doing, please? And then later on she says, e.g. picking up physical and emotional messages and sending them to different parts of the body. I'm battling with my inner scientist. So a really nice little neat fact actually there, Paula. Contrary to conventional wisdom, only 20% of the neurological signals are going from the head brain down to the heart and the gut. So although the head brain, our inner scientist actually, thinks that it's all that, it's actually outweighed massively by 80% of neurological signaling in our body-mind system is going up from the heart brain to the head and the gut brain to the head, which is the scientific explanation for why someone might have all of the great ideas and they might know the rationale for something, and yet they still don't do it. Why is that? Well, it's because their gut isn't online, or the want in their heart isn't strong enough, and therefore those signals aren't going upwards to the head brain to be aligned. So that would be an example, and it's around neurological firing and neurological signaling. And in fact, Professor Idan talks about, and you may be familiar with this one, neurons that fire together, wire together, neurons that are out of sync, unlink. So if a person's multiple brains aren't currently used to communicating and working together in a connected, aligned and coherent way, then they may not be functioning as optimally and therefore accessing the innate wisdom that's there. So I hope that provides a little bit of an explanation there for you. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much.
I've just added something in on the chat as well, just to back up what you've just said.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Mark. Lovely. So I think, Bernie, you've answered a question by Ashling. So there are further dates in Ireland subsequent to this. Bernie will probably be running courses at later dates, and we will hope to support her in that. And for those of you, I know we've got a few people around the world who aren't in Ireland. There's a course, well, there are plenty of courses in the UK. Feel free to contact us or look on mBraining.com. If you look on the courses page, course schedules, it will give some of them there. I also have a list of everyone in the UK's courses and their dates, which I'm very happy to send out. We're running a course in South Africa in August, August the 3rd to the 6th, if you fancy coming down there. Vancouver in Canada in September, and the 20th. Israel is in October, 22nd to the 25th. And we're in Greece at the end of November, beginning of December. There are also wonderful people from across the world who are doing mBIT trainings in California, in Netherlands, in Denmark, in Australia, New Zealand, all over the place, Italy. So do get in touch, and we're really genuinely happy to recommend any of those to anybody else around the world.
Okay, so one kind of final shot is that, pardon me, are there any other questions before we kind of bring the session to a close? Because we've now been on for about an hour and a bit, so probably time to wrap things up.
No, no more hands raised. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to say thank you to Reb and Mark for the for coming on and sharing their wisdom, their knowledge, skill and experience with us. And I think for me, and I know definitely for Mark and Reb, it's all about living more courageously in our own lives with the creativity, the innate creativity that we all have, and with massive compassion for ourselves and for others. So we're looking forward to possibly seeing you at some stage, and we're absolutely delighted that we've had the opportunity to raise awareness around mBraining. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernie, and thank you, everyone. Hope to see you soon.
Okay, I think that's it. So thank you very much for everybody, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you all, and enjoy the sunshine here in Ireland.
And in Lanzarote, Paula.
Yes.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
Paul, Paula, Aisling.